All right, everybody. We have a new Alex Karp interview. He was just on Fox Business yesterday. And Joe Lonsdale, one of the original co-founders of Palantir, who's not directly involved with the company anymore, but still supports the company, was also on the interview. So it was a really interesting, rare joint experience of both Karp and Joe Lonsdale that we don't get to see talk often on stage together at a Fox Business News event. So here we go. This is from Arnie's channel. Everyone check him out. Arnie does a lot of great work on Palantir. He uploaded this clip, and we're going to take a look at it. 6 minutes and 45 seconds. Let's see what Karp and Joe Lonsdale have to say.
Now is the co-founder and CEO of 8VC, Joe Lonsdale, who has just a huge amount of experience in Silicon Valley funding startups, including founding Palantir with current CEO Alex Karp. Both are here in a Fox Business exclusive and a rare joint appearance, gentlemen. Thank you both for being here. Alex is going to give us context on some of the big headlines coming out of Palantir. But first, let's start with you, Joe, and Silicon Valley Bank. Clearly, the depositors were made whole. Is that a good decision to have made that?
You know, Liz, there were rumors about this bank having issues for quite a while. A lot of us were not as exposed directly, but there were about 60,000 startup companies that were. If you look at the math, they probably would have only lost about 2 to 5% of their deposits. But, you know, on Friday, I took my money out of the regional banks. I had dinner with the governor of Texas with a bunch of other wealthy people. They've taken all of their money out of the other regional banks.
That was such a flex. He was like, I was having dinner with a bunch of wealthy people, and we took our money out of regional banks.
Banks in Texas, in California. I think there was going to be a major bank run. I think the FDIC using a small amount of money to basically make depositors whole was a smart thing for the regional banks themselves. This is not even taxpayer dollars. You know, there's a lot of populists on both sides wanting to attack VCs as parasites, wanting to, you know, slate call to euthanize the VC class. Like, listen, SVB lost their money. SVB debt holders lost their money. I think it was smart that the FDIC stopped the bank run.
Okay. Alex, what do you think? And also, you've got to explain the early years of Palantir when you had venture capital money coming in to float you. And I mean,
we screwed that up. We screwed that up too. We were exposed to auction rate securities in 2008. I didn't even know what an auction rate security was. You remember that? They locked up the money for about 5 months. It was terrifying.
So this is Joe Lonsdale talking about how in 2008, when Palantir was just getting started, they had their money in some places that weren't the smartest, like a lot of startups that got screwed by Silicon Valley Bank. Ultimately, they were made whole by the FDIC. But as a startup, sometimes you put your money in a place where you don't expect anything bad to happen, and then the world collapses, and then, you know, it's hard to get that money back.
This is the thing. I largely think that the cradle of U.S. industry is innovation. We lead the world in tech. We need the innovation, and Silicon Valley institutions are crucial. There is another issue, which is, why is Silicon Valley unpopular? And I think Silicon Valley is justifiably unpopular because, leaving aside things that Joe has invested in and co-founding Palantir, a lot of what Silicon Valley has done is not something that anyone really wants to support. It's like building these large industries where only a small group of people get wealthy and everyone else feels like, well, what did I get from? As opposed to Palantir and other companies that work with the defense, with U.S. defense and with our allies. And so there's what should have happened in Silicon Valley. Okay, you can debate that, but I think largely we have to save our tech industry. And then there's, why is Silicon Valley so unpopular? And Silicon Valley is unpopular because there are so few companies that choose America and its allies over our adversaries. So few.
Now, this is an interesting point that Karp's been making for a very long time that I just want to harp on for a little bit. The reason Palantir left Silicon Valley to go to Denver in Colorado in was it 2018, 19, around that time range, is primarily because of this argument that they felt that there was a monoculture being formed in Silicon Valley that was essentially parasitic on the companies that tried to think differently. So if you were a company in Silicon Valley and you tried to actually do things with the United States, you tried to help with defense, you tried to build products that you thought would be meaningful for the entire world, not just for a select group of elite people, you tried to not monetize attention by just getting a bunch of people to post a bunch of stuff in some app, you were looked down upon, right? You were seen as a company that wasn't actually innovating, wasn't actually doing something interesting, when in reality, you were doing the stuff that is keeping not only America safe, the West safe, but you were doing stuff that actually mattered in the grand scheme of things. And so what Karp is saying is there's a reason why there was all this pushback to the FDIC bailing out Silicon Valley startups. It was a good thing. Like, objectively, it was a good thing to stop a bank run and to make these small businesses whole, that at the end of the day, all they did was open a checkings account. They didn't expect to, be destroyed by a bank. But the question is, why is there all this pushback? And it's because people don't like Silicon Valley. People don't like what it stands for. People don't like what it creates, even though it is the technology hub of of the world. And if Silicon Valley didn't exist, so much innovation wouldn't exist. So it's like Karp's like, we need to protect that innovation. That innovation is good. But why do people hate Silicon Valley? And it's because of the culture that it's ultimately created.
Few companies that build things that actually have an impact on humans in America and in our allied countries, and so few people that aren't involved in this kind of weird bubble culture that somehow orients around them getting rich and the rest of us not profiting from it. So those are two separate issues.
We've got two billionaires right here. Joe, what is your response to that?
Well, I think if I was Alex, I would definitely see things in that extreme way. I remember being on the phone with Alex with a very prominent VC about 18 years ago, and the guy was laughing at us and saying we weren't a serious company because Alex didn't have a technical degree. So Alex proved him wrong. Alex now has 1.5 billion in treasuries, as far as I understand it, and no exposure to any of these banks in Silicon Valley. So,
and this is really important because Joe Lonsdale revealing that they have $1.5 billion in treasuries or something to that amount. Now they have $2.6 billion in cash. That means they're going to net $80 to $100 million, and almost guaranteeing they're going to be able to become GAAP profitable because they don't need to literally make that net income from clients and operations from revenue from operations. They can literally just bank the yield they're getting from these treasuries, and boom, they're using the $2.6 billion they have in cash. People are like, why aren't they buying back the shares? Because buying back the shares might not be as valuable as becoming GAAP profitable and having the shares organically increase. And to get to GAAP profitability, if you can get some money from the treasury just from interest, I mean, it's not a worst thing in the world getting 4 or 5% interest on 1.5 billion. So that in and of itself, I think, is a really, really crucial thing that Palantir has been able to do. And companies like Google, Apple, they have hundreds of billions of dollars they're probably throwing into these treasuries. And so instead of being exposed to Silicon Valley Bank, if they're getting money from that, it all but makes it more possible than not. And I think this is actually the reason Karp said that they're going to make GAAP profitable throughout 2023, 2 years ahead of expectation, because maybe they knew that interest rates were going to be bad, which means yields on treasuries were going to be up, which means if they have 2.6 billion in cash and they can allocate some of that cash to just be able to make a little bit more net income to get to that GAAP profitability to end the year, then they have a really good shot of making shareholders happy and Wall Street happy that they're GAAP profitable.
So he showed that guy, that guy wanted us to do social media at the time. He said, why are you working with the defense? But, Liz, I work on a lot of healthcare companies, a lot of companies in the biotech world that have saved
job
hundreds
creation.
of lives, going to save thousands of lives. And there's a lot of, overall, are there lots of ridiculous things in tech? Were there monkey JPEGs? Yes, there's all sorts of ridiculous things. I think right now there's a lot of hate coming from people who think in terms of bumper stickers on the left and the right that's totally unwarranted. I think the brightest spot of America is our innovation economy, is our brightest people creating new things on the frontier.
The part I definitely agree with Joe on is the thing that scares our adversaries the most, more than anything else, is the innovation in the American tech scene. So if you're Russia or China, you think about the missiles and other things we build, but what keeps you up at night are the kind of software products that we provide, that other companies provide.
Right.
And those are the things we have to be invested in, and they come largely out of Silicon Valley. Now, again, I think Silicon Valley would do well to understand, okay, we're interested in we're the bedrock of innovation in the world. Why do most Americans not like us? And just like asking that simple but legitimate question is super important for our country.
Palantir has expanded its business, has it not? You do big data for hospitals and all kinds of different companies, not just the government and the defense department.
What I'm involved in, what Palantir's involved in, and what I think Joe and his VC are also involved in is Silicon Valley once built things for the military and then exported it to everyday Americans and all over the world. And de facto, that's what we've done. So we built this kill chain. So a kill chain involves handoff process from AI, identifying target. You have to decide when a human's involved, when a human's not involved. You have to see the pedigree of the data. This is exactly the way every large institution works. Every large institution in the world is going to have functions that can be run by AI, functions that can't be run by AI. They need a taxonomy of where the data went, how it went. So if you're in a hospital, for example, there are things that only a doctor should decide. But then there are lots and lots of things that an algorithm can decide. But how do you decide who decided what, under what conditions, and verify that the doctor only decided what he's allowed to decide? So decisions of life and death. And just so you have a hospital, AI, and kill chain. In fact, the technical prerequisites are the same for both. And this is exactly what Silicon Valley did for the first 50, 60 years.
With venture capital.
Now, this is an important part that I want to talk about. This part is, people shouldn't get lost on this part. Karp's argument here is that the history of Silicon Valley has always been that you build products for the military, for the defense sector, and then you transport those down to Americans. And he's actually historically correct on this. For the first 50 years of Silicon Valley, instead of focusing on the consumer, they focused on the military, focused on the defense, built really good products. And then from those products being successful, but then they then apply those to the consumer. So when he's talking about the kill chain, he's talking about on the operational battlefield, when you have to get rid of an enemy, when you're trying to, what Ukraine's trying to do with Russia, they're using AI to identify what's going on here and there. They're using data insights from that AI, and then they're using governance solutions to be able to make sure that the data is acted upon in a correct, ethical, meaningful way that protects liberties, privacy, etc. And then they execute the task. Now you take that's meant for the government, developed for the government, and then you apply that to a hospital. And then I think Karp does a really good job explaining this analogy of like a doctor with a life or death decision, not life or death on the battlefield, but life or death in a hospital, having to make a decision using AI, data insights, governance, that they're actually supposed to be able to make that decision and then execute on that decision in the most meaningful way to quite literally save lives. That matters more than Facebook and Google. That matters more than seeing advertisements. Right? That objectively, it matters more. And then just from a financial perspective, you think of that scales to every hospital in the world. If it's that good and it's that necessary and it's that needed, how valuable is that? And so, that's not only why I'm invested in Palantir, but that's why the story of Palantir and why they're actually building stuff that matters makes me feel okay if the stock price is down. Because I'm like, well, they're building shit that matters. And my question is, in the next 5-10 years, does that shit still matter? And if it does, then I would be willing to take a bet on the companies that are making stuff that matters, especially if they can execute on exporting those things to places like hospitals and not just on the battlefield. But it comes from that philosophy of building it for the government first and then bringing it out to the rest of the world. And if Palantir can do that, I think they can be big.
Capital, Joe. And as we finish up, are you concerned that there will be a massive pillar of salt in the VC world where too many people are going to be too frightened to lend to startups?
Well, Liz, there was definitely a bubble in tech. That part of the anger that's right is that there was too much money in tech. There were a lot of silly things going on that weren't focusing on the stuff that mattered that Alex is talking about. Mm-hmm. If Alex hadn't done what he'd done, he prevented tens of attacks on American soil. He saved the government billions of dollars.
By the
there
way,
were people
Joe
doing
is
ridiculous
an incredible
things too.
Co-founder and a really courageous person. We disagree on every political issue, but you want to work with Joe if you can.
Alex is not quite a communist, so I really support him. No.
So a little friendly exchanges are at the end. Overall, I think this was a great interview. Great to see Karp really talk and bring his philosophy to the main stage. Great to see Joe, co-founder of Palantir. They both have a lot of respect together. Also talking about the problem in Silicon Valley, why we needed to make depositors whole, but why Americans hate Silicon Valley. I think that question right there is the question of the interview. Why do so many Americans not like Silicon Valley? And then you get into the deeper reason why they don't and why Palantir left Silicon Valley and is trying to solve some of those problems and actually build products that the rest of the world can work with. Those are my thoughts. Thank you guys so much for listening. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, what you thought about Alex Karp and Joe Lonsdale on this interview, and I'll see you in the next one.